My name is Sarah, and I was born and raised in a small town in Arkansas. We're the kind of town where everyone knows everyone's business, whether you want them to or not. My dad, James Whitaker, ran a local hardware store that had been in our family for 3 generations. He was old-fashioned, but he loved that store and, I believed, he loved me. Growing up, I always felt like I had to earn my place in his heart. I was the responsible one, the helper. My brother, Dylan, on the other hand, was the golden boy. Even when he was sneaking out, flunking classes, or getting in trouble, my father made excuses for him. "Boys will be boys," he'd say with a chuckle, brushing off the very things that would have earned me a lecture or worse. After high school, Dylan floated through life. Odd jobs, brief stints in college, some questionable friends. I went to nursing school, came back home, and helped take care of Dad when his health began to decline. I managed his meds, his appointments, even cooked and cleaned his house when his arthritis got too bad. So when Dad called me into his study one rainy afternoon, I thought it would be like any of our usual talks. Instead, he looked exhausted, distant, and mumbled something I couldn't quite process at first. "I changed the will," he said. "Everything goes to Dylan." I laughed. I thought he was joking. But the way he looked at me, ashamed, almost afraid, I knew it wasn't. "Why would you do that?" I asked, my voice shaking. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's better this way." I remember the thunder crashing outside just as he said that. I didn't know what shocked me more, his decision or the emptiness behind his words. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept going over everything I'd done for him, all the time I'd sacrificed, and for what? To be cut out just like that? The next morning, I got a call from my aunt, his sister. She was livid. "Sarah," she said, "your father didn't change that will willingly. I was there. Dylan was pressuring him for weeks. Your dad didn't want to do it." And just like that, something shifted in me. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was suspicious. And that suspicion would lead me down a road I never thought I'd have to walk. The road to fight for the truth. After that call from my aunt, I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker had happened behind closed doors. I knew my dad had been vulnerable, tired, sick, and easily swayed. But the idea that Dylan might have pushed him into signing over everything, that made my blood run cold. I started asking questions. Carefully. Quietly. First, I spoke to Margaret, Dad's longtime housekeeper. She'd been working for him for over 10 years and saw more than people gave her credit for. Over a cup of coffee in my kitchen, I gently asked if she remembered anything odd about the days leading up to Dad's will change. She hesitated at first, but eventually said, "Your brother was around a lot that week, whispering to your father in the den. He even asked me to leave early one day. That never happened before." That was strike one. Then I called our family lawyer, Mr. Camden. He'd been handling Dad's estate for years. When I asked about the new will, he sounded uncomfortable. "I wasn't the one who drafted the revised document," he said flatly. "What? Then who did?" I asked, stunned. "Your father said he wanted to go with someone new. A young guy Dylan recommended." Strike two. I dug up the name of the new attorney, some flashy firm in Little Rock Dylan had no business even knowing, let alone recommending. I scheduled a consultation, pretending to be a potential client, just to get in the building. There, in the waiting area, I spotted something curious. A notary log. Now, this part was tricky, but I'd once taken a legal admin course back in nursing school, just enough to understand procedure. I managed to glimpse the date and name on the will notarization. It lined up with the day Margaret said Dylan kicked her out early. Strike three. I went home and sat in Dad's old recliner, staring at nothing for what felt like hours. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to think maybe Dad had his reasons, but the pattern was too clear. Then I remembered something. The old safe. Dad had a tiny wall safe behind one of his bookshelves. He used to keep old paperwork and letters in it. He once told me, If anything ever happens to me and something doesn't feel right, look here first. My heart pounded as I moved the shelf, dusted off the keypad, and punched in the birth date I knew by heart. My mother's. It opened. Inside was a single yellow envelope labeled in his shaky handwriting, "If they force me." I didn't even breathe as I pulled out the papers inside. That was the moment everything changed. I held that envelope like it might vanish if I blinked. My fingers trembled as I pulled out the papers inside. 3 sheets, folded neatly, and a flash drive taped to the last one. My dad's handwriting was uneven but unmistakably his. The first page was a letter. "Sarah, if you're reading this, then something went wrong. I don't have the strength to fight anymore. Dylan's been relentless. He wants everything. And I'm scared of what he might do if I say no. He talks to me like I'm already dead. I'm ashamed I gave in. This isn't what I wanted. Your mother would have never stood for this. But I know you will. Dad." I stared at the page for what felt like forever, tears pooling in my eyes. Every line felt like a knife. Confirmation that my worst fears weren't just paranoia. My father didn't disown me. He was coerced, manipulated, cornered. The second document was a copy of the original will, dated 6 months earlier, naming me and Dylan as equal beneficiaries, 50-50. It also included a clause that if either of us tried to contest the will, the assets would go to charity. That was Dad, always trying to keep the peace, even in death. But Dylan must have realized he wouldn't get enough with a fair split. The third page was a notarized statement, unsigned but dated, where Dad had started to write out what had happened. He stopped halfway through the page. At the bottom, in all caps, he'd scrawled, "Look at the footage." My hands went cold. The flash drive. I rushed to my laptop, plugged it in, and waited. A single file, library_cam_feb12.m. I hit play. It was grainy and silent, but I could see my dad sitting on the couch in his study, looking pale and exhausted. Dylan stood over him, pacing. He slammed something on the table. "Papers, I think." My dad flinched. Then Dylan pointed at the papers and shoved a pen into my dad's hand. Dad looked up at him. He shook his head at first. Then, slowly, with a kind of defeat I'll never forget, he signed. "And Dylan?" He smiled. That's when I knew this wasn't just about family betrayal anymore. This was fraud, manipulation, elder abuse. And I had the proof. I didn't sleep that night. I watched that video over and over, as if some part of me still hoped I was wrong, that maybe Dylan wasn't the monster I saw on screen. But denial had no place anymore. The next morning, I drove straight to Aunt Linda's house. She was the only one who had truly believed something wasn't right. When I showed her the flash drive, her eyes welled up. "I knew he didn't want to sign that thing," she whispered, clutching my hand. "Your father was terrified of Dylan. He told me once, 'That boy can smile while twisting a knife.'" She encouraged me to go to the lawyer, but not just any lawyer. She had a friend, Clara Mendez, a sharp estate litigation attorney in Little Rock, who specialized in undue influence and elder coercion cases. I made the call. Clara was all business. When I explained everything and showed her the footage, she leaned back in her chair and said, "This is exactly the kind of evidence judges take seriously." I remember letting out a breath I didn't even know I'd been holding. But then came the hard part. Telling Dylan. I met him at Dad's house. He was already moving things around like he owned the place, packing up tools, sorting through furniture, even talking about listing it. "Dylan," I said, trying to stay calm, "we need to talk about Dad's will." He didn't even look up. "Nothing to talk about. Dad made his decision." "No," I said firmly. "He was forced to make a decision, and I have proof." That got his attention. He narrowed his eyes, walked toward me, and for the first time I saw it. His mask slipping. That false charm he always carried was gone. What the hell are you talking about? I found the original will, I said, and a letter, and a video of you coercing him into signing the new one. He went pale. You went through his safe? You left me no choice. He stepped closer. You're bluffing. No, I said. I'm taking it to court. And for a split second, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he laughed. Cold and bitter. You think a court's gonna take your word over mine? I was his only real son. You were just the nurse with a grudge. That stung, but only for a moment. I pulled out a copy of the flash drive, slid it across the table, and said, "Then I guess we'll let the judge decide." And he didn't laugh after that. The day I filed the petition to contest the will, I felt like I was stepping into battle. Clara, my attorney, explained the process clearly. We were challenging the will on the grounds of undue influence and elder coercion. The evidence we had was strong: the flash drive, the letter, the copy of the original will. But Dylan wasn't going to go down quietly. He hired an expensive legal team, flashy, aggressive, the kind of people who looked like they came straight off a courtroom drama. They came at me hard in the first round of filings, accusing me of snooping, of manipulating my father's final days, and even claiming the footage had been doctored. It was vile, and it hurt more than I expected. But Clara never wavered. "They're going to try to bury you in doubt," she said. "That's all they've got. We have the truth." When the case reached pre-trial hearings, Dylan showed up dressed like a saint. Clean-cut, shaking hands, even bringing a photo of him and Dad fishing. But I noticed he never made eye contact with me. The judge, an older woman named Judge Redman, was sharp and no-nonsense. She requested to see the video footage privately before admitting it into the case. The wait for her decision was brutal. For 2 whole days I could barely function, checking my phone constantly, pacing around the house, remembering how Dad looked on that couch, the way his hand shook as he signed. Then Clara called. "She's admitting the footage," she said, "and she's ordered a handwriting analyst to review both wills." That was the break we needed. But Dylan's lawyers weren't done. They sent a settlement offer the next day. It was generous, more than half of what the estate was worth. All I had to do was walk away, sign a confidentiality agreement, and disappear. For a moment, I considered it. I thought about how tired I was, how this whole thing had swallowed my life. But then I thought about my dad, his letter, his guilt, and his hope that I'd be the one to stand up when he couldn't. I told Clara, "No deal, we go to court." The next day, Dylan showed up at my door. No lawyers, no cameras, just him. He stood on my porch and said, "You're really going to ruin the family over this?" I looked him in the eye and said, "You ruined it the moment you used Dad's illness to steal from him." He didn't say a word. He just turned around and walked away. I knew then he finally realized I wasn't backing down. The day of the trial felt like something out of a dream. Cold air, stiff suits, and a courtroom so quiet you could hear the sound of papers rustling. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my heart pounding, clutching a photo of me and Dad from my nursing school graduation. Clara gave me a nod, calm and composed, but I could feel the tension in her posture. Dylan walked in with his legal team like he was some celebrity, smiling at people, shaking hands, trying to charm the court staff. I could see how convincing he must have been to Dad, especially during those vulnerable final months. The trial began with opening statements. Dylan's lawyers painted me as the bitter daughter who couldn't accept her father's final wishes. They said I was emotionally fragile, financially motivated, and had twisted a grieving man's guilt into a conspiracy theory. It took everything in me not to react. I reminded myself that we had facts, not fiction. Then Clara stood up and, with her steady voice, laid it all out. "We are not here because a woman is unhappy about a will. We are here because a sick man was isolated, manipulated, and coerced by his own son, our client's brother, into changing a legal document that no longer reflected his wishes. And we have the proof." The first few witnesses were people Dylan had brought in. his friends, an old coworker, even a distant cousin. People who hadn't seen Dad in months but claimed Dylan always had his best interest at heart. But then came Margaret. She stepped up to the witness stand, hands clasped nervously, and spoke with quiet strength. Mr. Whitaker, Sarah's father, was not himself the week before the will was changed. He looked afraid, and Dylan told me to leave early that day, which had never happened before. Then came Aunt Linda, who testified about Dad's calls, the things he'd said in private about feeling pressured and tired of being hounded. And finally it was my turn. I stood up, took the oath, and sat in that witness chair. "Why are you contesting this will, Ms. Whitaker?" the judge asked. I swallowed hard. Because my father was afraid. Because he told me, told all of us, that he didn't want to leave everything to Dylan. And because I found this, Clara handed the flash drive to the court clerk. They played the video on a large monitor in the front of the courtroom. There was a gasp from someone in the back as Dylan appeared on screen, pacing, slamming the papers, and pushing the pen into my dad's shaking hand. No one said a word when the video ended. I looked over at Dylan, and for the first time I saw it. Fear. The courtroom was still, the kind of still that only comes when everyone knows the tide just turned. After the video played, the courtroom shifted. You could feel it. Dylan's team fumbled to regain their footing, but the damage was done. They tried to argue the video lacked context, that maybe Dad was just having a bad day, or that families argue all the time. But that footage wasn't an argument. It was pressure. It was intimidation, and everyone in that room knew it. Judge Redmond's face gave nothing away, but her questions became sharper, more direct. Why was this will not prepared by the family's longtime attorney? Why was there no medical evaluation conducted at the time of the signing, given Mr. Whitaker's known condition? Dylan's lawyers danced around the answers, but the truth was simple. They thought they could get away with it. Then came the handwriting analyst. She took the stand and confidently stated that the signature on the revised will showed signs of hesitation, distress, and tremor. In stark contrast to Dad's usual writing style, even from just months earlier. Could this indicate he was under emotional or physical stress when signing? Clara asked. Yes, the expert answered. In my professional opinion, absolutely. I looked over at Dylan. His shoulders had slumped. He was no longer the smug, confident brother who believed he had everything locked in. He looked like a man unraveling. But what really sealed it came the next morning. Clara called Dylan to the stand. He didn't want to testify, that much was obvious, but legally he had no choice. Clara was calm, polite, and lethal. You claim your father wanted you to have everything. Did he ever put that in writing, outside of the new will? No, Dylan muttered. Did he ever say it to any third-party witness? I don't remember. Clara leaned in. You were in debt, weren't you, Mr. Whitaker? Over $50,000 in credit card debt and another $30,000 in personal loans. Isn't that right? Dylan's face turned bright red. Objection, his lawyer shouted, but Judge Redmond allowed it. He had no good answer. And then came the final question. Did you know your father left a letter, in his own handwriting, saying he was afraid of you? Silence. Dylan opened his mouth, closed it again. I didn't know that, he finally said, barely audible. The courtroom sat in heavy silence as Clara rested her case. I walked out of that courthouse that day not knowing what the verdict would be, but knowing I had done what my father asked of me. I had spoken for him when he no longer could. The truth was out, and Dylan's lies were crumbling. The verdict came 2 weeks later. I sat in the same courthouse pew I'd occupied for every hearing, fingers laced tightly in my lap. Clara sat beside me, calm as always, but I could feel her tension too. The courtroom was quiet, almost reverent, as Judge Redmond entered and took her seat. She spoke clearly, without drama, just the facts. It is the court's finding that the revised will was signed under undue influence and coercion. As such, the court declares the revised will null and void. The original will, dated February 6th of last year, will be reinstated and honored as the valid last testament of James Whittaker. I didn't cry. Not right away. I think I was too stunned. It wasn't until I stepped out into the sunlight, onto those courthouse steps, that it hit me. I had done it. I had protected my father's legacy. I had spoken for him when no one else could. And I had won. Clara hugged me tightly. You were brave, Sarah. So many people would have walked away. I nodded, holding back tears. He didn't raise me to walk away. As for Dylan, he left town shortly after. Rumors swirled. Debt collectors, failed job interviews, even a girlfriend who dumped him once the truth came out. I didn't keep tabs on him. I didn't need to. He was no longer part of my story. The house, the store, the savings, they all came under my name again. But it wasn't about the money. It was about setting things right. I didn't keep the store. I donated it to the town's historical society, turned it into a community workshop in my dad's name. James Whittaker Hardware became Whittaker Makerspace, a place for young people to build, fix, and dream, just like Dad always did. As for me, I went back to nursing, quietly, steadily, but different now, stronger. Every now and then I visit Dad's grave. I bring him fresh-cut magnolias and sit with him in the warm Arkansas sun. I kept my promise, I whisper. You're safe now. And in that silence I finally feel peace. Not just because I won, but because I didn't let fear rewrite the truth.